Grace and peace be with all of you. Well, that John the Baptist is back again. Last week, I compared him to the loud and irritating sound of an alarm clock, and this week, he's done it again. It's not often we get a chance to be called a brood of vipers, so we've had that this morning. So I want to start with a confession. I don't know all of you well enough to know if you have this same issue. But I have more than one coat. In fact, after living for 7 or 8 years in the city of Chicago, I have a closet full of coats, a wardrobe of coats, different lengths, different styles, different weights, different materials. And I will go even further. I have more than one closet. I have a coat closet. I have a linen closet. I have a storage closet. My husband and I each have our own clothing closet. My children have their own clothing closets. The office has a closet. You get the idea. So what is undeniable is that I have more than I need and that I have plenty to share. And if you look at other parts of my life, if you move beyond coats and closets, I would say not only do I have too much stuff, but I have too much email in my inbox. I have too many appointments on my calendar. I have too much stress. At every turn, I have the opportunity to eat too much food and drink too much. I live a life of too muchness. And now, on top of that, we have added this American concept called the holiday season, where we start at a baseline of too much and we cram in more. We have too much shopping, too much debt, just too much all around. And I don't know, maybe you've got this all figured out. I find that it's a constant struggle. But I do notice that we actually have a lot of vocabulary for trying to cope with this problem. How many of you have heard of Marie Kondo? Not as many as I thought. Okay. Yeah, she's a really interesting person. So I think we all know words like decluttering, de-junking, de-stressing, simplifying, cleansing, downsizing, right? We've got, just like I have a wardrobe of coats, we have a wardrobe of words in the American parlance for this constant effort, like Sisyphus, to somehow clear the decks of all this too muchness. If you don't know Marie Kondo, she's got a show on Netflix, she's got best-selling books. She's a really interesting person who talks about the spiritual nature of this decluttering. So the hard reality of our lives is that we're created physical beings. And what's interesting is we live in a physical universe that has a certain optimal range that makes life possible, right? So it matters profoundly for human life that the earth is a particular distance from the sun, and that there are certain physical constants that are true in the universe that enable life. Even down to inside the atom, the force that holds those subatomic particles together is finely tuned, and it matters that that force is exactly the strength that it is, or we wouldn't be here. And we all know when we go in for our wellness visit, what do? They check our temperature, which has an optimal range. They check your blood pressure, which, depending on your age, has an optimal range. And then they do some blood chemistry, and you get a printout of the optimal range for all these various things that they have tested you for, and your number, so you can see, am I in this optimal range? I can tell you that I am not in the optimal range in a lot of my life. With stuff, with scheduling, with email. As created beings, God has given us the gift of limits. And we don't like that. It's actually neurologically, we are wired to always add more. There's a guy named Daniel Kahneman that's done a lot of research on this. There are other people too. But human beings are designed at a default level to just acquire and add on. We're good at that. That's our instinctive response to life. But there are times when we need to learn to subtract, too. And a lot of the faithful life, the Christian life, is paying attention to our daily rhythms, to our daily commitments, and leaving space to breathe, leaving space for just room to be, finding that optimal range for our lives, which will change over time. And I think what John is telling us is we're always making choices, because with coats, with stuff, with commitments, whether or not we choose at that moment to add on or subtract, all that stuff, all those decisions, they're always a choice to connect or disconnect from the people around us, and therefore a choice to connect or disconnect from God and from the optimal, beautiful way of life that God wants for us. So if I have two coats, I can always make a choice, right? I can walk around in my coat and feel superior to the person who has none, or make sure it's a brand that makes me feel fancy or significant in the world. Or I can take that second coat and I can give it to someone who needs it. There's always that choice. Do I use these things, these little decisions, to disconnect, to disassociate myself from my fellow human beings, or to connect with them through an act of generosity and care? And I think that's a helpful way to look at this image of the winnowing fork. Later in the gospel, I think we'll get to the reading where Jesus scolds John a little bit for his temper. And John is a prophet in the old school sense. He's going to read the riot act to those people. He's an alarm clock. But in the end, that winnowing fork, I think, is God saying to us, I know you human beings have trouble figuring it out, figuring out the wheat and the chaff of life, the too muchness versus the enoughness of life. We just do. It's human. We have trouble with that. But God has designed the universe in a way that God knows the optimal range, and God wants that for us. So maybe instead of thinking of that winnowing fork as a form of punishment, it is in fact a great gift. There will come a day when God will help us sift through all those things in our lives that are making us sick, holding us down, disconnecting us from important relationships. And one day, all of that will get sorted, and our lives will be decluttered and dejunked, and we will be living in that optimal range of goodness and contentment and connectedness that God designed us for. Amen.